So on this conscious conversation, it's a great pleasure to welcome Tomas Bjorkman. Hello, Thomas.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thomas is a global citizen. He has lived in London and Switzerland, but now he's in Stockholm in his apartment, and he's wondering when he's going to get out, like all of us. So Thomas used to work in the financial markets. He's going to tell us a bit more in a second. And he's the author of 3 books, and that are quite relevant in terms of consciousness, conscious leadership, but I think also with what the world's going through. Thomas, can you tell us a bit about you? You know, what's your background? What did you do for a living, and how you came to write these fantastic books?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm Swedish, as you can hear from my name, and come from a very humble middle-class background in a small town in Sweden. But I realized quite early that I had a talent for mathematics and physics. So I was lucky to be the first one in my family, both on my father's and mother's side, to have the opportunity to go to university, and I studied mathematics and physics. But even though I really loved to explore the world from this natural science perspective, I also felt that I wanted to have a more direct impact on the world. So I decided to go into business, and I became a serial entrepreneur and started about 20 different businesses, some small and unsuccessful, but at least 3 major business ventures in IT and property and banking. The latest one was in banking, and when I left banking a bit more than 10 years ago, I was the chairman of a banking group in Scandinavia and also on the board of directors of one of the large Swiss banks, and I was living and working out of Geneva in Switzerland. But then when I sold my banking business, I was very fortunate to be able to then take a break and think about what to do with the second half of my life. And I decided that I wanted to really dive into and explore the relationship between and the interdependence between our personal inner development, or our own consciousness development, if you want to use that language, and societal change, and how society and consciousness are all interlinked and interacting. And of course, back then, 10 years ago, there was absolutely nobody understanding what I was up to. But my first book that I wrote coming out of the banking industry, that's actually called The Market Myth, and it is a short book, and it's an analysis of the market system, both highlighting its strengths. The market is a very, very powerful coordination tool that has served humanity in many ways very good. But also we have put a little bit too much trust into the market, and the market cannot help us with everything. And I also think that it is a problem that the market somehow has, in this postmodern world where we do not really know any other way of finding direction or being able to prioritize between different human values, then we are leaving too much up to the market. And we think that if we let the market decide, many cases it will lead to what is best for society. And in some cases that is true, but also in many cases we have to realize that is not true.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
So we were talking before the recording, the 2008 financial crisis. As you know, I suffered from it a lot because I used to build planes for the richest people in the world. And about 9 months after the crash, we stopped selling planes for a long time. And I observed, what happened. And it seemed to me that the market wasn't serving the greater good in some cases. There was too much greed, probably. Can you share a bit about that? Maybe it's talked about in your book, but it seemed that there is a need for a bit more consciousness by some bankers. And
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean that there is way too much greed, of course, in the banking industry, but also in the whole financial system. But I actually don't think that that the personal, individual greed is the main problem. It is a problem. But I think that the main problem is that the whole system is set up in a way that it actually promotes greed, and it promotes special interest. And if you've been working in the financial industry, you sort of realize that the market is not this sort of natural, neutral system that is just performing some sort of natural function. Even the sort of free market, if we even could talk about a free market, even the free market is a social construct, because we as humans, we need to decide on the fundamental playing rules in the market. For example, questions like what can be owned? Can you patent a gene? If you can patent a gene, how long should you have individual ownership of that specific intellectual property right, for example? And all of those decisions, which are political decisions, influence the way that the market clears, and also then influence both what is produced and incentivized in the market, but also the division of the value created in the market is dependent on these fundamental rules. And so far, these fundamental or constitutive rules of the market has more or less just evolved unconsciously throughout hundreds of years. And in many cases, some of these rules made sense when they were created 200 years ago, but then we have just unreflectively left them in place, and today they might not serve us any longer. That's one aspect. And the other aspect is what I saw in the financial industry was that we were actually, as an industry, lobbying lawmakers to constantly tweak these constitutive rules so that the market would clear more and more in our advantage, rather than to clear in the advantage of a common good.
Yeah.
And that's of course natural, and I don't blame anyone for that. But when the lawmakers are not really aware of the effect of this lobbying, and there is nobody lobbying on the other side for the common good, it's a very uneven playing field, which tweaks the market constantly in the wrong direction. And this is not just something that the banking industry is doing. Of course, this is done by the pharma industry, the media industry, the food industry. And over the years, the market is tweaked to serve the vested interest rather than the common good.
We saw it with Boeing that influenced the FAA, and now, so it happens in every industry, right?
Yeah.
So the book is called The Market.
And I should just say that I think that the politicians here, the lawmakers, not just the general public, we who elect the lawmakers, but also the lawmakers are quite clueless around this. They are just happy to get this big paid for white papers explaining what new laws should be implemented. And in many cases, they don't understand this, and they just rubber stamp it.
Yeah, and also most of them get elected by contributions from business. So so your book is called The Market Myth. So what is the myth?
Well, I'm actually there using the word myth in both its meanings. I mean, we use the word myth to name something that is a widely spread belief that is actually not true. And I address a number of such beliefs around the market, and one of them is, of course, the common belief that the market is just. The market, you could claim from the theoretical framework that the market, in some very specific term, is efficient, but there is nothing not even in the theory that says that the market is just. So that is one myth. Another myth is that the market could really provide all and every goods and services that we need. But again, even the first course you take at university in macroeconomy, you learn that the market is always failing when it comes to public goods and what some people call merit goods,
Mm.
and yeah, pointing out such misconceptions.
Okay.
But then also using the word myth in the other meaning, and that is the meaning of a story, a narrative, and more precisely a meta narrative. And any society, and that is one of the main theses of my latest book, the world we create. Every society needs to have a fundamental story, a meta narrative that is sort of holding the whole society together. And today, the international society is really just held together by this singular myth about the market, and that the market can help us to progress. So the market has in some way replaced our earlier belief in science, which the postmodern philosophical perspective has in many ways very rightly critiqued. But then that postmodern critique of science more or less left the field open for the market to come in and dominate. And of course, before we had science, religion and God played this role of the meta narrative, the ultimate authority that we could sort of always rely on would provide the correct answer. Religion, science, and now the market.
And what happens to that belief in a crisis like we're living now? It seems that Wall Street has lost 4 years of gains, evaporated in a week or something like that. So, because what you call the market, I also call money, the focus on money. So and what I'm amazed now is that most politicians around the world are using science to make actions on the coronavirus. It's in my lifetime.
Science has a bit of a renaissance right now, we can hope.
I think so. And it's the first time that I see world politicians which have an agenda tied to business now taking actions to save the citizens,
Yeah.
Well, before this happened, you could see pharma companies or Boeing taking actions for money and negating the well-being of their citizens. So what's your view? Because I would like to talk about your other books, but what's your view when you look at the big picture of what's happening now, how it could help us maybe somewhat transform a bit our society?
Yeah. I think that as we are all starting to adjust to a new reality that can last for a very long time. I mean, we are probably not talking about weeks here. We are talking about months or even longer, where we would have to adjust our meeting online instead of going to conferences, not flying around in the world like we used to do. I think that will have the effect of us realizing that another way of life, another way of expressing our society is actually possible. And I think that could help us to broaden our collective imaginary of what is actually possible, and that big changes are possible. And now I still just hear the message from media, from politicians, and from the business that the focus is very much on, yes, this will be a long crisis, but we are injecting a lot of money into the system, and we hope to, as quick as possible, get back to business as usual. But of course, we don't want to get back to business as usual. No, it was business as usual that took us here. So the question is, if we can keep our imagination open enough so that we can use this opportunity for transformation. And then I talk both about individual transformation, because this gives us as individuals an opportunity to take a pause and to reflect on our own lives and situation and our values and our stories, our narratives, the narratives that we tell ourselves, but also collectively to have a chance to try to see if we can use this as an opportunity for transformation in society. But I'm not too optimistic, because going back to the financial crisis 2008, even some people within the financial industry said that this is actually a good opportunity to try to reform the financial markets and the financial system and try to build something better. But then, even though we had Obama in the White House at that point in time, that was an opportunity that was completely lost.
Mhm.
We just gave the banking industry trillions of dollars, and then we went back to business as usual.
Mhm.
So I hope that we can use this as a positive opportunity, but I'm not that optimistic.
The challenge I see is that before this happened, what this has done is forced us to stop. You know, the environment is probably doing the best. That, you know, we've seen the satellite pictures of China.
Sure.
However, the citizens are not the. I mean, the citizens are consuming, but it's really the leaders, which is why I work with leaders, and leaders obey to the market. You know, the market drives everything. You know,
Yeah.
a CEO doesn't really control the company. A CEO obeys shareholders, or usually banks and mutual funds. So there needs to be a shift in consciousness, in my opinion, that, you know, it's okay to be wealthy, but if you've destroyed your environment where you live and you live in a bubble, then
Yeah.
so I have hope that there'll be a shift. Unfortunately, we'll lose some of it after, like we lost in 2008. And can we talk about your latest book? Because I was really captivated by the subtitle. So someone told me, check out the subtitles of books. They're probably more important than the titles. And your book, your latest one, is called The World We Create. So I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah.
And then the subtitle is From God to Market. Can you share a bit of wisdom from that? What's in that book?
Yeah. It's really about what you just mentioned. It's about consciousness development, both consciousness development on an individual level, but also on a collective level. And I should have mentioned that earlier when I spoke about me coming out of the financial industry and wanting to explore this connection between our personal individual consciousness and societal development. That what I did was that I set up a foundation in Stockholm called the Oak Island Foundation, Credit Foundation. And what we are doing in the Credit Foundation is that we are both theoretically interested about this relationship, and I've been writing these books, but we are also doing practical work on the island of trying to work with individuals and see how one can facilitate consciousness development. So what do we mean by consciousness development? Well, and as you can see from the subtitle of my book, I'm trying to convey the message that even though we often think that the world around us is some sort of objective reality, like we meet the market as an objective reality, but most of the things that we as humans meet in our everyday lives are actually socially constructed things out of our own making, even though we are not always aware of that. And one of my favorite examples there is, of course, money. Okay. So money is just a human invention, an invention that could be different. But we are still, as individuals, you and I, dependent on money. So when I go to 7-Eleven to shop, it doesn't help me at all that I know that money is just an invention. It's just a human idea. So if I tell the person at the checkout, why do you need my money? Money is just an idea, and then I walk out, and I will be caught by the police. So for us as individuals, money in today's society is almost as important as oxygen. Okay, but there is an important difference here. Because even if we all, or if the totality of humanity together collectively decided that we do not want to be dependent on air and oxygen any longer, we couldn't do that. We would still be dependent on oxygen.
Yeah.
But if the totality of the humanity, or in just one country, we made the collective decision that we don't want to use money any longer as a mean of exchange. We want to divide the wealth created in society by some other mean. That could happen tomorrow. Okay. But the strange thing is that we very often seems to get this the other way around, that we somehow believe that, for example, the planetary boundaries, the environmental planetary boundaries, are up for negotiation, whereas the market forces we just have to obey. When it is, of course, the absolute opposite way around. And that is really the main point in my book, to try to convey the understanding of how we create this social reality, everything from God to market. God, even science as a method, is a human creation. The market is a human creation. But then we start to believe in these things. We create God, but then we start to believe in God. That we create science, and then we start to believe in science. And we should believe in science, and I'm arguing this in the book, in some very important cases. For example, when it's about coronavirus and the spread of this epidemic, there, of course, science has a lot of things to tell us.
Yes.
But when it comes to moral questions, for example, then we cannot rely on science. Then we need to rely on something else. And then the question is, should we rely on God or should we rely on market? And we need to realize that also they are human constructs. And that we as human, we need these constructs, and we need this meta-narrative to keep the world together. But as the postmodern philosophers have rightly taught us, every meta-narrative is just a human construct, but we still need them. So how can we now create the next story to tell ourselves that could take humanity to the next level of consciousness, but also society? These social constructs, they could be more or less conscious. So how can we build a more conscious society? How could we build a more conscious market, for example?
It's amazing what you said, that before this crisis, we could not stop because we had to protect the economy. Now we've basically stopped. In most countries have stopped the economy, so the impact will be significant. We're using science to take action, but also our morals. In Italy, we're told that doctors have to make a choice. Do I save this person or this person? Yeah. And if you're 70 years old, you're going home and knowing you're going to die because I'm going to save. And if it's parents with kids, then I'm going to save him because he's got 2 kids. So morals are being in question now. So
sure,
it's amazing, where we use the fact that we cannot take care for the environment because the economy would be killed. Now that this virus has come, we are basically killing. My government is saying we're going to go to no expense. We're going to spend as much as we can to save people and then to rebuild economies.
Yeah, but we are also racing against time here.
Yes.
So if we didn't have the foresight to build up a capacity, a spare capacity, then we might not have the time to be able to build that capacity and train people, even if we throw money at the problem. And then, of course, going back, not being too critical about the market, I should say, of course, that in my book, I also talk about all the positive aspects of the market. The market is the most intelligent, self-organizing system that humans have ever invented to allocate resources. And for certain types of resources, it's a uniquely strong self-organizing system. But it is a system that in its present construction is focusing almost exclusively on a very specific sort of type of efficiency, and does not put any priority on resilience. So we can see that today in the Swedish healthcare system, where where the market forces has created a situation where we have absolutely no buffers of any material. Everything is down to just in time.
Yeah.
And when border and transportation is closing, we ran out of material in 1 week. And that is a logical consequence of the market maximizing efficiency.
Yeah.
but not resilience in a system.
I'm a lean manufacturing expert, and I recently read that it's causing crisis in many hospital systems because
Yeah,
they want more masks, and but the lead time is 4 months,
yeah,
because now they have a spike in demand. So it has optimized the market, for the optimum dollar, but
yeah.
there's no backup, there's no spare capacity. So
No, no.
it's
And
amazing.
with this lean system, if you don't have any buffers, uh, we cannot build new factories
No,
in 2 weeks.
no,
So it doesn't matter if we put in $1 billion to buy
no.
masks,
You're
they
right.
are not just available now.
You're right.
We could build the factories and we could have plenty in half a year.
Yeah.
But yeah. So the market makes the system very fragile and short sighted,
Yeah.
but efficient.
Yeah. Tomas, I believe that every crisis holds the seed for a breakthrough.
Yeah,
Does that mean that it's going to be watered properly and transformed? But so the 2008 market held the seed for a breakthrough. Unfortunately, there was no breakthrough. I've been told that it's actually worse because the bankers learned to play the system better, that we're
yeah,
probably sitting on a nuclear bomb right now.
yeah,
Worse
yeah.
than 2008. So what do you think could happen, and maybe we can talk about the Nordic secret, because your book is about the Scandinavian countries, which I was privileged to work with Volvo in Sweden. There is a difference, at least between America and Scandinavia, and maybe we can go into that and maybe come back to my question later.
Yeah,
what
yeah.
what is so different about
I
Scandinavia?
just I just
Yeah,
show the cover of the Nordic
yeah,
Secret, which is a book I wrote 2 years ago together with my Danish friend and colleague Lena Andersen, and I see this book as a case study showing that large scale consciousness development in a population is possible, and that consciousness development in a population can have substantial impact on the development on societies. So essentially, it's a story about the Nordic countries, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, at the end of the 1800s being the poorest non-democratic agrarian societies in Europe. Sweden was that poor that a large part of the population was starving, and just like in Ireland, we had a huge wave of emigration to the US because people were not just able to support themselves in Sweden. 30%, I've heard, is the number of the working population that actually emigrated to the US. And then just a few generations later, even before the Second World War, all the Nordic countries were on the top when it came to the richest and the happiest and the most stable industrial democracies. And there has, of course, been given many explanations for this transition, but a forgotten, very much contributing factor to this shift, we argue in the book, was the fact that we had very visionary, both politicians and intellectuals in all these Nordic countries 100 to 150 years ago, who knew about the importance of consciousness development and societal change and the relationship between these two. And they knew that in times of rapid societal transition, and of course back then they saw modernity coming. They saw in the UK and in Germany how industrialization and urbanization was reshaping the societies. And they knew that in these times of rapid social change, it's just so natural for us humans to want to have an external authority to hold on to. We hold on to a dogmatic religion or to an authoritarian leader, an Erdogan or a Trump. But these politicians, they didn't want to be authoritarian leaders. They were 100% committed to building stable democracies. And they knew that the only way to build stable democracies is to build them from bottom up. So they wanted to create lots of what we today might call conscious co-creators of the modern democratic society. And they wanted to make sure that there was a substantial part of the population that have come so far in their inner maturation or consciousness development that they had internalized the locus of control and become enough grounded in themselves to be connected with an inner compass to be able to navigate this rapidly shifting society. And then, do you know what they did to create and facilitate the creation of these conscious co-creators?
No, I don't.
They actually opened what I sometimes call retreat centers.
Oh.
So they opened a lot of retreat centers. So by the turn of the last century, 1900, there were 100 centers like this just in Denmark, 75 in Norway, and 150 in Sweden, where young adults, after working a couple of years, and back then you were probably in your early or mid-20s, could spend up to 6 months later on with full state subsidy at these centers, with the expressed aim of becoming enough grounded in yourself to be able to rely on your inner compass and not being relying on an external authority to be able to be co-creators of modernity. And when this was at its height, almost exactly 100 years ago, then actually 10% of each young generation participated in one of these 6 months retreats. And of course, that created what we today would call a tipping point, some sort of critical mass. And especially since these participants in these retreats, they did not just come from the elite in the society. They came from everywhere in the society. Actually, the majority was from farming or working class background. So you had these conscious co-creators then everywhere in society, and at least 10% of them. And of course, that helped us to build these strong industrial democracies. Now, and that's why we call it the Nordic secret, because this history is actually not generally known even in the Scandinavian countries. So now, well, after the Second World War, we forgot a lot about this thinking, because this idea about the importance of our inner development, that came from the German idealist philosophers like Goethe, Schiller, Herder, and von Humboldt. And back then in Scandinavia, German was our main academic language. So all these intellectuals and politicians, they were reading Goethe and Schiller in original. And as you might remember, these German idealists, they reacted against the Enlightenment philosophers' view of our mind as an individualistic, rational machine, the homo economicus, as we would call them today, which is part of the market myth, that we should be these rational individuals optimizing our own utility. No, these philosophers said, no, that's not the case. Our mind is not a rational machine. Our mind is actually an organic, self-organizing, constantly developing system that can develop throughout life. And that process can be supported, and it should be supported. And one of the main goals of society should be to support this consciousness development for all citizens. And they call this Bildung. And in Scandinavia, we translated this concept into Folksbildung, meaning Bildung for everyone, consciousness development for everyone. But after the Second World War, we stopped reading the German philosophers and we turned to the Anglo-Saxon world. And of course, in the Anglo-Saxon world, what we found there was Locke and Descartes and Homo economicus. So we forgot about this importance of our inner world, and we became very good positivists in the Nordic countries. And now we say we argue in the book that now we are losing this a bit, and we can actually see it in society how we are losing this secret that once helped us be strong and democratic nations.
Sorry, I didn't know this background, and I spent quite a bit of time in Sweden in my work. And I really love the word conscious co-creators, because this is my language, you know.
Yeah.
We're always creating something. Are we doing it consciously or unconsciously? Most of us, most of the time, it's unconscious.
Yeah.
And I tell people sometimes life events destabilizes you enough to open a book that you've never opened. You know, like Eckhart Tolle. Oh, suddenly I find wisdom. When Eckhart came to Montreal, it was the biggest, you know, there was 6,000 people, you know, dentists, factory workers, you know. And, you know, so someone opens your book, you know, The World We Create, and to find out that we actually, and I'm very touched by what you share, because we never spoken before, but I recognize in what you said that the current times where business has completely stopped, like for me, I have a lot of free time now because the clients are not calling. It is a time to transform myself. And I found out recently that over the last 2 days, there's sadness and anger that has come up, because I've been rejected from what you call the market. I call it the system.
Yeah.
I was rejected from 2 companies for who I was, you know, a man who was trying to bring consciousness because they were not ready. And sometimes the system rejects, you know, what it needs the most.
Yeah.
And
but I understand that you were successful in your management career by using these insights you had, as long as you were not talking about them.
Exactly. And this is what I found out, that sometimes what we just talked about, you said even in Sweden now, people forgot. The older people probably remember, but some of the young people don't know. And I talked to a very dear friend in Sweden. He says Sweden is becoming less Swedish recently.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And immigration doesn't help, and nothing wrong with the immigrants, but it kind of dilutes social problems and all this stuff. It's really powerful. Let me ask you one last question, because I'm very inspired. What is your greatest wish as a man? Because you're a very deep person that I've discovered, obviously, now. For what's happening now, what's your greatest wish for humanity through this crisis?
No, I think I want to go back to what we said there before, and that is that this crisis becomes an opportunity for reflection and evaluation, but also imagination, and to try to see something new. And doing this reflection and imagination, both on an individual basis, that we all find time to imagine and connect to ourselves and to our roots, and perhaps also connect to nature. This is a good opportunity to spend time alone in nature, and I think nature has both a healing effect on us, but also a very inspiring effect on us. So if we can use solitude in nature to really feel how we are connected to the larger system, and then from that individual reflection and imagination, start to collectively, like we are doing now with Zoom calls, video conferencing, telephone calls, talking to other people, and engage in a collective sense making, a collective reflection, but also a collective imagination, and trying to concretely imagine how we could come out of this crisis, and do it in a very concrete way, not just talking about in abstract terms that we need to create a new system, we need to go to a system B, a game B, or things like that, but what does that mean in reality, and not making the mistake again from the financial crisis of 2008, where there was so many people realizing that the old system was bad, and we had Occupy Wall Street, and we were against, but nobody could really articulate something positive of where we wanted to go. I think that is what we need to do today. We need to articulate where we want to go, knowing that we are on this exponential technological developmental curve. So it's difficult to imagine the world in 10 years, but we have to do that. We have to try to see that the world that we create can be created differently.
That's very beautiful. My greatest wish is that we all consciously co-create a world that is more human.
Yeah.
Because with the machine, the world is just going to keep accelerating if we're not careful.
Yeah.
And right now, I have a lot of friends just like me that are wondering, how am I going to buy milk and bread for my kids? And not today, but in a few weeks, people run out of money. So that we don't go back to consumerism after, because we can claim the market, we can blame the market, but as consumers, we buy. We have a choice what we focus on. So, and I love nature because what you mentioned, nature to me has a special vibration, which is love. Nature is always perfect. And I didn't tell this to you, but my people know I've had 2 depressions in my life following my firings. And the trees in my forest have always welcomed me with open arms, never judged me.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Always welcome me.
Beautiful.
Thomas, it's been amazing.
Thank you very much.
Shared so much in such a short time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Take care now and keep safe.